Hello and welcome to the first webinar for the Level 5 Early Years Lead Practitioner. I'm Laura Sykes and this is
Gemma Carr.
And we are the tutors delivering the Level 5 qualification. So the first webinar is B1 legislation, effective implementation of legislation and guidance and administration as well. So your learning aims for today, so to learn about legislation and guidance that impacts on policy, procedure and practice in early years, to learn about local and national child protection and safeguarding policies and procedures in practice, to learn how to identify when a child is at risk and how to challenge in order to protect them, to learn about the role of the designated safeguarding lead, and also to find out about the findings from child practice safeguarding reviews. To learn strategies to effect collaborative approaches to working with parents, professionals and multi-agencies, to learn how to promote inclusion, equality and diversity, and to learn how to maintain accurate and coherent records and reports. So these are kind of the aims of the first couple of assessment plans that you will be carrying out on the Level 5 qualification, and the objectives is therefore for you to understand these learning aims and to be able to put these into practice. So legislation in early years. So there are of course lots of different pieces of legislation that you need to be aware of and understand as a lead practitioner in a senior role within an early years setting. But we're going to kind of just do an overview of these 10 pieces, and you will carry out independent research when carrying out your assessment tasks moving forward. So we've got the Children Act from 1989 and again 2004, and it focuses on the welfare of children, and this states that they must have an environment that enables them to be happy, healthy and safe. In order to do this, children must be safeguarded against abuse or risk of abuse, and local authorities should work in partnership with professionals as well as national and local agencies to promote the well-being of children. All early years settings must be registered and have safeguarding policies and procedures for staff to follow if they have concerns. We then got the Childcare Act of 2006. So this is kind of about promoting children's health and safeguarding by implementing the early years foundation stage curriculum framework that we use today. It also states about the importance of having trained paediatric first aiders, having evacuation training, and ensuring that records are kept for risk assessment as well as accident and incidents, including home incidents. So the next one is the Disclosure and Barring Service, so DBS. So this is an enhanced criminal records disclosure where children's barred list check must be obtained for all adults who undertake regular activity with children, but kind of working with children. So it's important that these DBSs are carried out. We then got the UK Council for Child Internet Safety, so this was from 2008, and it's a group of more than 200 organisations drawn from across the government, industry, law, academic and charity sectors that work together to keep children safe online, which as we know is very, very relevant in today's kind of life really. So we've then got the Keeping Children Safe in Education from 2021. So this is a kind of piece of legislation that sets out the legal duties that you must follow to safeguard and promote the welfare of children and young people under the age of 18. It is actually being updated later this year, so in September 2024, and it does further define abuse, neglect and exploitation, and also focuses on the terminology around child protection both inside and outside of the home. So definitely something for us to look out for and be aware of when those changes come. So we've then got the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and this is an important legally binding agreement signed by 196 countries, and it outlines the rights of every child regardless of their race, religion or abilities. We've got the Protection of Children from 1999, and this requires early years and childcare settings to ensure that all employees and volunteers who have regular contact with children are suitable to work with children, so focusing on safer recruitment and of course DBSs as well. We've then got the Working Together to Safeguard Children from 2018. This sets out that local authorities, childcare and early years settings, NHS, social services, police and any individuals should work together to promote the welfare of children, so focuses very much on the kind of multi-agency working. We then got the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act from 2015, focusing on prevent duty. So this places the duty on early year settings to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. And then we've got the Data Protection Act from 2018 and GDPR, which focuses on the importance of everybody knowing that it's their responsibility to use personal data, and to ensure that we follow these rules when we are collecting data, when we're storing it, and of course making sure we're only keeping it for relevant periods of time.
So as an early years lead practitioner, you need to be understanding how these pieces of legislation implement practice in early years and how you're into your own setting. So we've outlined this into a table, sort of some ideas and ways that this can be impact into your setting. So the Children's Act has an impact as all settings must be registered and have safeguarding policies and procedures. The Childcare Act implemented the EYFS and highlights paediatric first aid training, evacuation training, record keeping, ratios and risk assessments. The DBS is we've got everyone working with children must have a DBS, the impacts on safer recruitment and policies and procedures around that. Internet safety impacts on the settings, policies and procedures, because you'll be using a lot of settings nowadays, have your iPads, social media, WhatsApp groups between the teams, all of the ways that we're including that technology. Keeping children safe and education impacts us on safeguarding training, policies and procedures as well. The UN Conventions of the Rights of the Child, we've got our early years settings must promote the rights of the child. So there are different acts within that and we've got to be promoting those. Protection of Children Act impacts on safer recruitment and the DBS again. And working together to safeguard children impacts on safeguarding training, policies and procedures and the importance of multi-agency working and information sharing. So highlighting on that all of your staff should be having the safeguarding training, they should be confident with their policies and procedures and know all of those. The prevent duty, so prevent training, understanding what prevent is, policies and procedures surrounding it, and embedding the British values, including supporting children to learn the right from wrong. The data protection, so this is not specific for early years, however, is very relevant for us, but this should be involved within our policies and procedures relating to the collection and storage of data. So again, within your role as the early years lead practitioner, it is very important that you understand both your local and national child protection and safeguarding policies and procedures. This includes within your setting, your town or county and nationally. So automatically when we think about safeguarding, we think about MASH, LADO, but you've also got specific areas of the country within your county that may cause certain safeguarding procedures and policies or where to make referrals slightly different. So for example, you've got the Surrey Safeguarding Hub or you've got the Southampton Safeguarding Partnership. So within your role, it's important that you know what you have got local to your council. So how would you identify when a child is at risk? So identifying this and when a child is at risk of abuse is really important. So we must continue to be able to recognise the signs, symptoms and indicators and behaviours of abuse, including physical, emotional, neglect, sexual, domestic and online abuse. As a lead practitioner, you will need to be aware when to safeguard parents and fellow colleagues. So again, that role of you becoming that lead practitioner is the step up. We're not just thinking about the children in these situations, we need to be thinking about our parents and your colleagues around you. So how would you challenge or order in order to protect them? So as a lead practitioner, you are likely to have or in future have the role as a designated safeguarding lead. So the procedure for reporting may look different from when you have previously been an early years practitioner. So you need to ensure that you understand your settings reporting procedures so that you can challenge concerns in order to protect them.
So that kind of role of the designated safeguarding lead, so like I said, as my colleague said, it's important to be aware of what that role is, what those responsibilities are. So some of you doing the level 5 course might already be a designated safeguarding lead, so therefore have carried out the training. Others of you may not be quite yet, and maybe it's something that will come in the future. But it's really important that we understand what that designated lead for safeguarding's role is. So the earliest foundation stage makes it clear that practitioner must be designated to take lead responsibility for safeguarding children in every setting. and it does include childminders who must take lead safeguarding responsibilities for themselves. So the lead safeguarding practitioner has clear and distinct responsibilities, so they need to be able to liaise with statutory children's services and the local Safeguarding Children's Board, soon to become safeguarding partners. They need to be able to provide support, advice and guidance, and are responsible for their staff to ensure they're receiving ongoing training. Attending a child protection course enables them to identify, understand and respond appropriately to signs of abuse and neglect. So those who are working in settings or schools must observe the government's Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance that we've already spoken about today. And this was updated in 2018 and continues to be updated. So it's really important to stay up to date with this piece of legislation. Alongside also the working together to safeguard children. So again, another key piece of legislation guidance that needs to be followed. And again, we have already covered that today. So make sure that you are clear what the roles and responsibilities are of the designated safeguarding lead within your setting, and particularly if that is the role that you fulfil as well. So the next thing we're going to talk about is child practice safeguarding reviews. So they were previously known as serious case reviews, but the name has changed. And it is important that we know what child practice safeguarding reviews are and how these are used to inform practice, really. We use the findings from these reviews to decide on training, policies and procedures in practice. So we're just going to talk about a couple today, but please do also carry out independent research around other child practice safeguarding reviews, particularly within your local area. So the first kind of person we're going to talk about today is Vanessa George. So she was a practitioner within a setting that took photos on her mobile phone of the children and then sent them to other people that were outside of the setting. And from that kind of practice review is the mobile phone policy that we've got. It's embedded within the EYFS as well, but that is why we don't have mobile phones in the setting. So it safeguards us, really. It safeguards the children because it can't happen, and it safeguards practitioners because there can't be an accusation of it, because you shouldn't have your phone within the setting in the first place. So it's just one example of how child practice safeguarding reviews, the findings from that review has impacted on current practice in early years now.
Very recently, there's been a couple of news articles, hasn't there? We've had Kate Ruffley, who mistreated a specific child within the setting and suffocated the child into a beanbag in the room, sort of swaddled and suffocated this child and was left for 2-3 hours, which is in every way not okay. Supposedly this had been happening before with this child as well. So I think it's from this hasn't yet started as a child practice safeguarding review. We haven't seen anything come from this yet. However, I think this is going to be this is going to have a big impact on us in settings. I think we're going to have a lot of safer sleep legislation, whether that's some settings aren't in the room at all times with the children. Maybe that's something that we've always got someone in the room whilst they're sleeping, sleep checks, all those kind of things. I think that's going to how that's going to kind of impact us going forward. There's also been another case of the Roxana Lecker case, which has recently just come out of a 21-year-old who has been charged of 25 different counts of child cruelty whilst working in a setting, which for me immediately screams whistleblowing. And the fact that this has happened 25 times in a setting. Why has nobody brought this forward? Why has nobody in the room working with her? Why has this never been brought to the DSL already within the setting? So I think that is going to become a lot stricter within their whistleblowing policy, and I think that it could be a case that from these, it could even be something that Ofsted begin looking at even as they're coming in setting and kind of questioning staff on kind of what's your whistleblowing policy. I think that's how that's going to step forward and how that's going to affect us. There are quite a few, when you have a look on the .gov website, I think it's to be very aware of what safeguarding reviews are happening in your area as well. You can have a look at those. It can be a shock to see in your area just how many are currently happening, but I think to review those and be aware of what's happening and kind of where legislation could change because of these ones that we've spoken about today. Obviously Vanessa George was historical, the other two have only sort of just been out in the media, so I think it's going to come through, it's going to filter through to us, and it's going to make some big differences for us.
Absolutely, and I think it's important that we're not only aware, like you say, of those historical cases that have impacted on practice and what we know today in early years, but being aware of absolutely what's in your local area is really important, being able to reflect on those and review the findings, but also being aware of any cases that are going around that are likely to lead to a child practice safeguarding review, and what the possible outcomes could be is really important to support our practice too when it does come to safeguarding. So strategies for partnership working. So as a lead practitioner, partnership working is crucial. Therefore, you need to understand and be able to use strategies to effect collaborative approaches to work with parents, colleagues, professional bodies and multi-agencies. So it's really important that you're able to reflect on your practice in your own setting. Think about how you work with your parents in your setting currently. How do you work with your colleagues, and how do you work with other professionals? And just kind of reflect really on the different strategies that you may already use. One of the key strategies that we do use is communication, and of course there's lots of different ways that we do this. So whether that's through online apps such as things like Tapestry and Family, whether it's email, whether it's picking up the phone or speaking to somebody at handover, or completing forms. So there's lots of different ways that we do communicate with others, so whether it's parents, colleagues or other professionals, and it's important that we review those and we ensure that communication is effective.
One thing on that, I think it's also important to understand when is the right time to use what communication. So, for example, online apps, when is it right just to say, oh, by the way, we've just had this happen? Or when is it appropriate for you as manager, as a lead practitioner, to pick up the phone and say, just so you know, this has happened today, I think we need to talk about it, and pick up, those kind of things. What is the correct communication that we should be using with our parents as well is really important now, because often you can hide behind an email or hide behind the Tapestry app or those kind of things. So it's important to kind of be aware of when to use those.
Absolutely, yeah, when to use those different communication methods, when is it appropriate, what is it to talk about, and you're absolutely right, it is knowing when is the right time to do this. And as a lead practitioner, it's something that you need to be able to kind of to work out, be able to do in practice. Something else is those barriers to partnership working. So of course there can be many different barriers, but in order to get that effective collaborative kind of partnership working going, we've got to make sure we know what these barriers are and we can overcome them. So some barriers can be things like if we've got parents or other professionals, colleagues with English additional language, maybe deaf parents, they might be illiterate, so unable to read or write, and time can also be a big barrier as well when we're trying to speak with parents, colleagues or professionals.
I think it's also finding ways that we can overcome those barriers, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
And thinking about ways that we can, so for example, with English as additional language, do they have an interpreter? Do they have a family or friend who can kind of come along to handovers with them? Or even do we give those handovers or documents to them as a typed up document so that they can run it through Google Translate, finding out those things. Or even it might be then that they can then take that home and ask someone to translate it for them. Being flexible on our time and kind of making it work for them as well. We know that parents work predominantly 9 to 5, so it's finding times around that we can catch them to talk as well, I think is important, and making that time for them.
Yes, absolutely. And as a lead practitioner in that senior role, whether that's predominantly a management role, it's important that we know what those barriers are. We've identified them, but you're absolutely right. We also need to know what those strategies are, of how we're going to overcome them and how we're going to make sure that we've got effective partnership working. And it's important that we know what those strategies are and how we might change them for the individual child, family, parent, colleague, or professional.
So within your work and your assignments, we're going to kind of be looking at how you promote inclusion, equality and diversity as well. we need to be reflecting on practice and how your setting promotes these things for all children, their families and colleagues, and it's being aware of all of those. I think for me, so often you would ask a colleague, a member of staff, a learner in our situations, you know, how do you promote equality, diversity and inclusion? We celebrate all of the religious festivals. Full stop. And you sort of think, but there is so much more around equality, diversity and inclusion. We've got family structures, we've got SEND, we've got stereotyping, parental beliefs, cultural backgrounds, LGBTQ plus community. We've got so much that is important. It's no longer just thinking about, oh, it's Chinese New Year, so we're going to make some spring rolls. It's exploring everything around that and bringing that into our setting. And I think there's a lot I feel about gender roles currently as well. So sort of I've had an example before. I've put a photo of a child walking around with a boy walking around with a pink buggy in the nursery. I took a photo, and for this child, he was newly walking. He was pushing a support frame so that he could walk. For me, that was great, wonderful. Unfortunately, the parent didn't see that the same way, and got quite aggressive and came into setting and sort of made me take down that image because he thought I was going to make his child gay because he was pushing around a pink buggy. And I think it's really important for us, again, as lead practitioners, to be able to stand there and go, actually, this was the reason that I put that photo up, and that's the reason I did that observation, you know. And there will be challenging conversations, and you need to be confident enough to kind of stand your ground on certain things as well. And I think that's one situation when you've got sort of a 6'2" man talking down to you and getting quite aggressive, and being confident to say, actually, this is why I'm doing it, this is how it supported your child, this is the way to go forward with it. We don't stop children from playing with certain coloured toys or anything like that, depending on their sexuality. So I think it's kind of being confident with how you promote it and those conversations that could happen in setting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it is, as a lead practitioner, you do have to have some of these challenging conversations, particularly around inclusion, equality and diversity. And it can very much be around the children and their families. And of course, we've got to make sure we're being inclusive, but we also need to make sure we're looking after our colleagues and our team when it comes to this as well. And I very similar had a situation where I did work with a male practitioner, and a parent came in and said they didn't want this male practitioner changing their child's nappies. And again, you know, there's lots of conversations around the management about how to manage that. And it is definitely something worth reflecting on. How would you approach it? It is a difficult one. I mean, in this situation, the management team decided that to be inclusive to that colleague and to not feel like they had done anything wrong. We said, you know, we're all practitioners. If that child needs their nappy changing and he was the only one free, then he would need to be able to do that. And, you know, unfortunately, the family did actually leave the setting that I was working in at the time. But it is really, really important to, you know, promote that inclusion, equality and diversity with your team, with your colleagues, just as much as it is for the families that we work with. And there is no kind of right or wrong there kind of with how you might deal with a situation like that, but it is important to be aware of those challenges and the different outcomes that you could go down.
I think it's often you sort of, you know, you're sort of almost told to believe the parents were always right, but actually in those situations, unfortunately, they're not. You know, we have the right to look after our staff. We have the right to protect their equality within the setting. Those roles and responsibilities are the same for every single practitioner, and every single practitioner should be doing the same, male or female. And I think that's important to kind of think about those scenarios that could happen and how you would manage those and what might come of it.
Absolutely. And, you know, that setting calendar is important. Of course, it is one of the ways that we promote inclusion, equality and diversity, but there are so many more. And absolutely right. As a lead practitioner in that management role, you need to be able to think about those different ways, almost kind of outside of the box of equality and diversity. And yeah, we do ask that you kind of reflect on your role as a lead practitioner in promoting inclusion, equality and diversity.
So record keeping, so sort of this is thinking about what records you do, what records you do to complete, how you maintain accurate and coherent records and reports, and what do you need to consider as a lead practitioner. Again, every setting might be slightly different with what records they keep where, how they store it, but record keeping is an important aspect of your role as lead practitioner, and you must ensure that all administration is carried out effectively and in line with the legal guidance. So it's important for you to kind of think about these things, and is your record keeping accurate and coherent? If a certain member of staff who was there that dealt with the situation wasn't in, could you have a flick back on that record and know exactly what's happened? Have you got that backing behind it? So, or even if a member of staff's left that dealt with it, because these can be brought up later on. Also thinking about GDPR, is everything safe? Is everything secure for everybody? Again, think about your staff, parents and your children in that situation. So some of the different types of records and reports are that we've got your summative and your formative assessments, your settling in paperwork, registration paperwork, which as we know has got a lot of personal information on, accident and incident forms, medication, we've got send, referrals. We're going to have a lot of paperwork, so it's being confident is how those stored. And a little bit like when we were talking about the communication, some of these things are stored online, some of these things are stored in real life paper. So how are these being stored? How are they being kept safe? As lead practitioner, what are you checking is being done to make sure that these records and reports are safe?
Fantastic. So I hope that you found today's webinar informative and kind of getting you to start thinking more from that kind of lead practitioner perspective. So hopefully you kind of feel that what we've covered, you understand or will be able to put into practice. You understand how legislation impacts on policy, procedure and practice. Again, how local and national child protection and safeguarding policies and procedures are impacted in practice. That you would feel confident in identifying when a child is at risk and how to challenge this in order to protect them. You understand that role as a designated safeguarding lead. Understand the findings and the importance of knowing the findings of child practice safeguarding reviews, as well as any potential cases that are likely to end up with a review. That you're able to use strategies to support partnership working, promote inclusion, equality and diversity, and to maintain those accurate and coherent records.
There are some things in this that we might have asked questions and you are a little bit unsure of, whether that's your own policies, procedures, or whether that's sort of the greater legislation. And I think it's really important that these questions are asked to encourage you to go and find that information. Ask those questions of the staff around you. Guys, what would we do if that happened? Or how would we deal with that? You know, that's what these are for, is we kind of want you to kind of go off and find that information, ask those questions yourselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really important, and that is kind of very much the difference from any previous qualifications you've done to then going on to that level 5, is that more reflection, that deeper analysis, and looking at the impact that will have on you as well as the people around you within that lead practitioner role. So the webinar today will support you with your upcoming assessments. Thank you.